And thank you everyone very much for joining today for the Annual Technology Baseline 2024 Transportation Update. As Daniela just mentioned, this is a great opportunity for you to ask questions of the entire team that worked on this update. So please do drop those in the Q&A box as we roll along. And thank you as well to the entire team that made this work possible. This is a collaboration between the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and Argonne National Laboratory with leadership and sponsorship from the U.S. Department of Energy. Thanks all of you for making this possible. So our agenda today is to talk about why the ATB, provide an overview of the project, demonstrate the website, and then discuss your questions and comments. Please, again, do drop questions in the chat as we go. So the content and purpose of the ATB are to provide information about technology, cost, and performance projections in a website with a summary data set with links to publicly available resources with a set of scenarios that highlight the potential for technology improvements and also through interactive charts that are on the website. This is not a primary analysis model or a set of all-encompassing future scenarios. And we do this because we want to offer the community a perspective on the rapid pace of technology development and what that could mean for technology cost and performance across energy sectors. This webinar today is about the Transportation ATB. We do have a companion product, the Electricity Annual Technology Baseline as well. These assumptions are used to provide consistency for analysis in the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office of the U.S. Department of Energy and its supporting national laboratories. And we like to make this available for transparency and to support third-party analysis in understanding how they can leverage the national laboratory expertise. So as far as the overview of the Transportation ATB project, what we do in this update is to take new information about vehicle component costs as well as fuel and blend stock costs from the literature and pull that together into a synthesized data set of modeled vehicle prices, fuel economy, emissions by fuel and fuel costs, include several important assumptions along the lines of discount rate, VMT, and lifetime, and use all of that to calculate what are termed here the outputs of levelized cost of driving and emissions. In this 2024 update, we've updated the documentation of cost components, recent sources of projections and analysis, including autonomy, EIA, Annual Energy Outlook, and other EIA information that's been updated. The electricity standard scenarios, which is a report of projections for the electricity sector, also a National Renewable Energy Lab product, and the GREET model. Autonomy and GREET are Argonne tools and analysis capabilities. We've also updated fuel costs for hydrogen, and we've added additional pathways for biofuels, as well as an updated charging and refueling and sizing and utilization update. So one new feature on the Annual Technology Baseline this year is the ability to compare the updated trajectories with our previous update to get a sense of what has changed. In the Annual Technology Baseline, we like to think of it as a portal to key data sources. So we really encourage users to dig into areas of interest and to use the ATB as a way to see some of the key public sources of information. So those are listed here for vehicle costs and fuel economy, fuel costs, fuel emissions, and then for the other assumptions that we use for calculation. So these are key publicly available sources that the ATB relies on for our summaries. And the ATB provides a website, a Tableau workbook that's downloadable and that also serves as the back end of the interactive charts, formatted CSV data files, as well as these presentation slides. All of these products enable exploration of component costs, vehicle price, fuel economy, fuel costs, financing assumptions, levelized cost of driving, and emissions to explore those ATB assumptions. We hope that this is valuable to this community by providing a consolidated set of summary assumptions and organizing things in a way that enables exploration. And we hope that you'll let us know where it's helpful and also where it could be more helpful to you. And some of the types of applications that have where ATB has been used or where we think it can be useful include several different types of transportation modeling. The Transportation Standard Scenarios is a new report that will be coming out this year, as well as integrated economy-wide modeling and analysis, including the Global Change Analysis Model and decarbonization analysis. And with that, I'd like to turn things to my colleague, Paige Jaden. And Paige, if you'd like to take it away, and yeah, and you're going to grab the screen share, right?
Yep, let me grab it. Okay, can you hear me and see my screen? Hold on. Can you see my screen, Laura? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so for this portion, we'll intend to do kind of a brief demonstration of the website to really kind of highlight the structure and hierarchy of all the data that's included, and then kind of give a sense of, where things are located and what kind of information you should expect to see here. So I'll briefly go over the website that's shown now, and then I'll switch back over to the slides to go into the content a little bit more in more detail and kind of go through, what are the specific scenarios, what are the metrics, what are some of the technologies that are included. So again, the goal here with this demo is really to provide an orientation on the types of information that are available on the ATB, how to navigate it. We won't be going into a ton of detail on all the specific kind of results for each specific technology, but to kind of give you a sense on what's there so that you can explore on your own. So this is the main landing page of the Transportation ATB. I'll just kind of go over what's under the main navigation and then switch to the slides. We have kind of three categories here. Under the About section, you have some kind of key, more general, high-level information on here. As Laura noted, a really cool new feature this year is changes in 2024. So for many of the metrics, you can plot like the exact changes between this year and then what was published in the last release of ATB. And on this section, you can also find definitions of all of the technologies and scenarios that are included, as well as some of the key assumptions and then, acronyms and the references. So kind of putting all this stuff into a consolidated place. And then really the meat of the ATB is kind of in this technology page. So it's broken down into four primary categories. And this is where, the primary data, the primary assumptions are for those technology data sets. So it's broken down into four categories. So light duty vehicles, medium and heavy duty vehicles, aviation, and fuel. And clicking within any of these categories gives an expansion into the specific technologies that are included in the ATB. So you can see those listed for light duty vehicles, and then clicking any of the technologies, you go into more details on that specific topic. So this shows, for example, gasoline light duty vehicles, and many of these pages follow the same structure where you have kind of a definition on the top. You have interactive charts for the metrics here, and I'll go into the charts in a little bit more detail here. I'm just kind of showing you what they are and what they look like. So these are interactive. You can use different filters. You can hover over them to see the values where the references come from. So we have interactive charts here for various different metrics. So kind of scroll through these, and again, we'll go into more detail little bit later. And then under that, it has the key assumptions. So anything that was like any important notes, any assumptions that were used to develop the data above, as well as kind of any of the keynotes and assumptions, all of the references. And then if you scroll to the bottom, you have kind of the consolidated list of references. So mostly all of these technology pages kind of follow this similar format on the ATB for these various other categories. And then going back to the main navigation, switching from technologies to the last main category is data. So this data page allows you to download the data to kind of explore on your own. So you can download an Excel workbook. You can also download a Tableau workbook that has the figures kind of pre-generated, so you can explore that way. And then it also includes an embedded Tableau workbook that kind of has the full set of data that may not be reflected in some of the charts on the technology pages. But you can always come here, as we'll allude to many times throughout this presentation, to kind of explore the full data set. So this is all available there. So now for the remainder, I'll switch back to the slides to kind of go through some of the key information in more detail. So please let me know, Laura, if you can't see my slides, but I think it should be working.
I can see it.
Okay, great. So yeah, now we'll go into a little bit more detail on kind of, the specific scenarios, the metrics, and the technologies that are included on the ATB, and how to view some of the charts and other similar details. So to first start, as an example, we'll start with fuels. So if you kind of click this thing in the navigation here to go to fuels, the fuels are broken down into various categories. So you can see these here. So we have on-road fuels, we have blend stocks, which feed into some of those on-road fuels, aviation fuels, and marine. And so we'll kind of go into on-road fuels as an example. One thing to note is that new this year, we've included an additional or an expanded set of biofuel pathways. And this is to better reflect kind of the current status of technologies that are out there and being researched, as well as Laura mentioned, to support some of those additional modeling efforts in this space. So to link with other transportation models in this area, and to support things like the upcoming transportation standard scenarios. So on the fuel side, look out for kind of an expanded set of fuel pathways this year. So clicking into kind of on-road fuels as an example, I'll go into what's included here and what to expect on the specific technology pages. So for on-road fuels, this includes gasoline, diesel, the related biofuels, as well as natural gas, and then electricity for EV charging, and hydrogen for fuel cell electric vehicles. The scenarios that are included for fuels are the same as last year. And these scenarios listed here are meant to reflect different scenarios of kind of like empirical versus model data. And then for the model data, the various scenarios are meant to reflect different assumptions on production volumes, and then as well as kind of current or future technological progress for those kind of conversion pathways and for the other fuel pathways. One thing that I really want to highlight here is, so these are our scenarios for fuels. Currently, the ATB is only providing data for fuels for certain snapshots in time. So for example, we have kind of like current fuel prices and future fuel prices for a given fuel pathway. But we are currently not including kind of full time series trajectories. So what's the price from 2023 to 2050 over time? So fuels is just a snapshot. So this is in contrast to the vehicle data, where for the vehicle data, we actually do have estimates of vehicle attributes, for each year through 2050. So when we kind of transition and see some charts where we're combining vehicle data with fuel data, I just want to note that the level of advancement and the changes in some of the charts are really due to the evolving vehicle technologies, and less so to the fuel, where you can kind of mix and match fuel for various different snapshots, but kind of the evolution over time is due to the vehicle technologies. So we'll show some specific examples of this when we view the charts, but I just wanted to highlight that here in discussing the fuel scenarios. So if you click on any of those kind of technology pages, like for on-road fuels, for example, for each of the different technologies, you'll see the data in interactive charts. So for example, this is showing gasoline and ethanol in this upper left-hand corner. You're able to filter on different kind of fuel types, different pathways where relevant, and then different scenarios. And then, below this on the page, you would see the specific data for each of those. And then you can also, using this black arrows here, toggle between kind of price data versus emissions data. And then once you're on the table, if you kind of hover over any of the data elements within the table, as we kind of saw on the website, you can see more details there, some keynotes, and then, references of where any of those specific data points came from. And then, similarly, as I mentioned on all of these pages, if you scroll to the bottom, you'll see kind of the key assumptions and in more detail on anything to note for those scenarios. This shows just kind of diving into a little bit more detail for electricity as an example. So you can see kind of all the full set of emissions data on the left. This is showing for light duty vehicles for various different kind of grid mix scenarios. So you have kind of emissions on the left, and then you have the associated fuel prices on the right. And again, when you're in the website, hovering over this can provide more data. And I believe we show it in different units as well, depending on what the fuel is. Okay, so switching from fuels, I'll jump into the vehicle side and show some of the vehicle related data. So again, we have light duty vehicles and then as well as medium and heavy duty vehicles. And starting with light duty vehicles, this kind of shows the list of the vehicle related metrics that we have on the ATB. So attributes that are directly related to the vehicle include fuel economy and then as well as modeled vehicle price. And then combining the vehicles with the fuels, we have these kind of combined metrics that are levelized cost of driving. So kind of what's the cost per mile to kind of like own and operate a vehicle over the lifetime, and then as well as a per mile emissions that's based on the fuel economy of the vehicle as well as the emissions associated with the fuel. So these are the key metrics for vehicles. And then this lists the scenarios that we have for vehicles. So we have 3 primary scenarios, which are on the top. So that's advanced, mid, and conservative. The advanced and mid trajectories are really based primarily on autonomy modeling from Argonne National Lab, and they reflect various levels of technology advancement for all the different vehicle technologies. So, where advanced is kind of on the more aggressive or optimistic end, and then mid is a little bit more in the middle. And then new this year to the ATB, we've also developed a conservative trajectory. So this is using the same starting point as the vehicles modeled in autonomy, but then using rates of improvement based on the annual energy outlook from EIA, just to give kind of an alternative scenario and an alternative view on technology progress and technology advancement. Then we also have the constant trajectory. This was included last year, but in this year, we're only really using the constant trajectory for vocational and refuse vehicles. And this is because the vehicles reflected in the AEO that was used for the conservative trajectory do not really represent kind of the level of improvement that we would expect for these vocational and refuse vehicles. So for these, we're just holding values constant at the base year, kind of similar to what we did in the last release of ATB. So kind of the first 3 are really the key primary scenarios for vehicles for this year. And before getting into this, I've alluded a lot to like what we did last year, and Laura already mentioned this, but a new feature I think that's really cool this year is the comparison. So this is under the About menu on the main navigation. So you can see, what do the data elements look like this year in the 2024 release compared to the last release in 2022. So you can kind of directly see the changes there. So just want to plug that as we, mentioned comparisons from last year. So then switching over to what the charts actually look like on the vehicle pages, this shows the vehicle specific metrics that we have, and we're showing kind of a mid-size 300-mile range battery electric vehicle as an example. So fuel economy here is shown on the left for the various different scenarios, and then modeled vehicle price is shown on the right. So within these charts on the website, you can, switch between the metrics. You can show different size classes. So for example, a mid-size is shown now, but you can view, SUVs or pickups or the other light duty classes that are included, as well as other details for the specific powertrain technology that's shown. So for battery electric vehicles, you're able to switch between different all electric ranges from like a 200 to a 400-mile range. And then for some of the other powertrains for like hybrids or gasoline vehicles, you can see other kind of detailed or alternative vehicle configurations that are available and modeled through the autonomy analysis. So that was vehicle related metrics. The next charts shown here reflect, excuse me, both vehicle and fuel data. So the chart on the left shows the levelized cost of driving on the left, and then the CO2e emissions per mile on the right. And again, this is using the battery electric vehicle 300-mile range as an example here. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So as we noted before, kind of when we were discussing the fuel scenarios, the trajectory charts here, where you see kind of levels of advancement in levelized cost of driving, for example, here are really representing changes in the vehicle technology. So for LCOD, it's reflecting changes in vehicle price and fuel economy over time. And this is because the fuel values that we are using are really static for any given scenario, because again, we're just representing those snapshots of fuel. But to explore the impact of fuel attributes on these metrics, we've included kind of a subset of different fuel pathway technologies that you can explore. So shown on the top here, you can see kind of a baseline fuel pathway, a lowest CO2e emissions, and then as well as a lowest price. So these are kind of a down select and are meant to reflect kind of a simplified subset of all of the pathways that are included on the ATB, and to really show some of the potential bounds, like in cost or emissions, for example. And we took the simplified approach because for some of the fuels, there are many different pathways, and that's many different pathways, and then also like combinations of pathways and scenarios. So we thought that would be a lot of data. So this is intended to be a more simplistic view to kind of represent the range. But to get at this kind of range and the implication of the subset of fuel pathways, we've included these bar charts here that are meant to show the full range of data on the ATB, and then kind of where in that range the selected fuel pathway lies. So again, we have this subset of three representative fuel pathways here, but I will note that while we're just showing a subset here, all of the fuel pathways that are included for the fuels are available in the data download, and they're also available on the data page. So you can still look at the LCOD and the emissions implications of all of those. It's just on these kind of charts on the vehicle pages, we're showing a smaller selection. So the green bars here are meant to reflect both the range of all of the pathways, and then as well as where in that range the selected fuel pathway is. So again, the green bar is showing, for this chart, for example, the range of fuel prices for all of the electricity pathways that we have included on the ATB. And then the black bar shows where the baseline, the currently selected one, which is the baseline, falls within that range. And then if you change the fuel pathway here, like if you selected lowest price, for example, the full green bar is not going to change because it still reflects the full range, but then your black bar is going to change corresponding to the selected fuel pathway. So if you pick lowest price, for example, this black bar is going to fall to the bottom of the range because you're showing the lowest price within the range. And then you have a similar kind of set of dynamics for the emissions. So again, this is to really reflect, this mixing of fuel data and vehicle data, and that, there's many different pathways that are available to explore on the ATB, and we've included kind of a subset here. Going back to the chart, and again to these selected fuel pathways, you have the names here, but these black arrows on the top allow you to explore in more detail what those selected fuel pathways are. So if you click the descriptions, you'll see on the next page what that shows, but then you can also see, okay, what's the associated price and the associated emissions with those fuel pathways, though those are also reflected kind of in the black bars on these charts. So for example, if you click the pathway description item, you'll see a table that looks similar to this, where for the given technology, you'll see what we're defining as the baseline fuel, the lowest CO2e emissions fuel, and the lowest price fuel. So you kind of explore that in further detail. And then, as I mentioned, while the vehicle pages just show the subset, so kind of what you see on the top, where you're just showing a sub-selection of the fuel pathways. If you go to the data page, or if you download the full data set, you'll have access to all of the different fuel pathways here. So you can see this is kind of your filter view on the Tableau workbook on the data page. You can select your vehicle, and then under fuel pathway here, you'll see all of the different options and all of the scenarios for all of the hydrogen fuels, for example, that's shown on this page. So again, you have access to all the data, just might, they're not all shown on the vehicle pages. So moving on to from the technology specific pages, we also include under the kind of light duty vehicle hierarchy a comparison page. So you can see the metrics across different technologies, across different powertrains, all on the same chart. So for example, this is showing model vehicle prices for mid-size cars, for a gasoline powertrain, a battery electric, and a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. So you can has the capability to make comparisons and show how these metrics compare and contrast across the various different technologies. Okay, so moving from light duty vehicles on the medium and heavy duty side, it follows a very similar flow as light duty vehicles. We have a same set of metrics. It's just that now these are reflective of these larger vehicle classes. And there's many different vehicle classes that are represented within the autonomy modeling that you have access to through the ATB. So I'll kind of quickly go through these just because they reflect the same workflow and kind of the same intention as the light duty vehicle side. So again, this shows the vehicle related metrics for as an example, a Class 8 long haul sleeper for a fuel cell electric vehicle. So you can see fuel economy here for the various different scenarios on the left, and then modeled vehicle price on the right. So again, similar functionality as the light duty charts. And then again, we also have the vehicle plus fuel charts following the same format. Again, this is combining the vehicle and the fuels data. One change that you will see here on the levelized cost of driving charts is that values are now reflected as a range for medium and heavy duty vehicles, and specifically for battery electric and fuel cell medium and heavy duty vehicles. And this range is really meant to reflect the uncertainty in charging behavior, charging costs, and refueling costs for these applications. So for example, for battery electric trucks, depot charging of those trucks may look very different and have different costs than corridor or on-road charging. In addition, future hydrogen costs are very uncertain. So due to some of that uncertainty, we reflected the LCOD as a range for these. And then again, both of the kind of the high and low values of these ranges are available and documented on the fuels pages for what they mean. So again, these are a range on the medium and heavy duty side to reflect uncertainty in charging and refueling costs. And then again, similarly, we have a comparison page where you can show the medium and heavy duty vehicle metrics comparative across the different powertrains and technologies. And then again, as we've noted a couple times, we have a comparison page where you can see this, but again, you can always make comparisons on the data page using the embedded Tableau workbook, or just downloading the data yourself and viewing the different data in Excel or whatever visualization platform. Okay, so that's the key data. To kind of wrap it up, I'll quickly touch on some of the more general pages that are applicable kind of to all the technologies. So first, as I mentioned, we have the definitions. So the definitions page, again, this is under the About header. This defines how on the ATB we are reflecting vehicles, or how we're reflecting and defining vehicles, fuels, scenarios, and then the different metrics on the website. And then some of the definitions, like for example, if you go to the definitions for levelized cost of driving, it's going to take you to specific pages that are showing those definitions or those details in a lot at a lot more finer level. So for example, for levelized cost of driving, we have, what's the equation we're using to calculate that? What are all the underlying assumptions? So some of these have kind of more detailed pages where it warrants more description. And then lastly, or maybe not lastly, second to last, as already noted multiple times, we have the data page that allows you to download the full data set as an Excel workbook. It also has a Tableau workbook you can download, and then you can also explore the full kind of embedded Tableau workbook that lets you kind of view the whole set of data on the ATB. And then one thing I didn't note is that within the Excel download of the data, we do include kind of row level detail. So if you go to a specific, year, metric, and value, we have row level detail on where that assumption is coming from, any modifications or key assumptions that need to be made, and then, the reference for that value. So that allows you to see kind of any specifics on some of the data elements in a lot more detail. And then, after today, we'll also post the webinar. And then, yeah, lastly, mentioned it a couple times now, but this just shows all of the kind of filters you have access to in the embedded Tableau workbook on the data page. So you can kind of have everything all at once on your fingertips and explore it all in one consolidated chart. And I think that's it, Laura. Pass it back to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Paige. And while I'm wrapping up, please be thinking of any questions that you'd like to have us answer, because we do have some time for Q&A coming up next. Next slide, please, Paige. Yeah. So we really hope that the ATB is useful to all of you and facilitates access to key assumptions about technologies and systems, providing a national laboratory and DOE perspective. If you have questions or comments that you think of after this webinar, there's a link here to provide those, and we're always happy to hear from folks who are using the ATB. Next slide, please. We also have a link to sign up for updates. So if you want to be sure to hear of the next update for ATB, please do register so that we can keep you up to date on what's going on with the annual technology baseline. Next slide. And we'd like to acknowledge our funders from the U.S. Department of Energy, Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. Next slide, please. Okay, so any questions or comments? We'll entertain those now, and I think we've had a few. I'd like to start off with a response from Ehsan. Ehsan, would you like to summarize the question and provide your response?
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry, Laura. Is this in the battery swap question?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, I was about to type it in there, but yeah. So what it's beyond what is currently in the efforts. So what we have seen is that what we would ideally imagine is that these would the battery substations would likely be distributed in like high traffic areas with more dense EV populations and along major transport corridors. So and there are public data is available on like different vehicle classes, types, and also in terms of efficiency for these could come from like registration databases, utility reports, and charging network data that like independent analysts could access beyond what programs are like ATB or like autonomy provides. But there are other tools that does transportation system modeling, such as, for example, Argonne's Polaris model could be an example that can help understand what would be the optimal placement for that.
Great. Thank you, Ehsan. And I hope that answers the question. It is a little bit beyond the scope of ATB, as Ehsan indicated, but if the questioner has follow-on, please let us know. There was also a question that asked, can you explain how you account for cost of charging and infrastructure in the levelized cost of driving? And Paige, I think you had volunteered to answer that one.
Yeah, I can answer that. So the cost of charging infrastructure is included in the electricity prices. So we calculate this uniquely for light duty vehicles and then as well as medium and heavy duty vehicles. And I'll describe it, but this is all documented in pretty sufficient detail or in pretty high level of detail on the electricity page. So for light duty vehicles, essentially we assume a mix of different charging applications like residential, public, and then as well as DCFC charging. And those all have different assumptions essentially on cost and utilization, but they're all rolled up and aggregated into essentially an average cost of charging. And then on the medium and heavy duty side, we have different assumptions for essentially depot charging applications versus corridor charging applications. And this is used to reflect that range as we saw on the LCOD chart. So we kind of have depot charging as the low end of the range and corridor charging as the high end of the range. And so those all include assumptions on capital costs for charging equipment, as well as utilization, as well as power, charging power levels. And then we calculate essentially a levelized cost of driving, or levelized impact on the effective electricity rate using the EVI FAST model. So this is all documented on the electricity page, and that infrastructure is included in the electricity prices that we're showing.
So there have been several great questions rolling in, and I'd like to encourage everyone to continue to ask questions. Paige, several of these are for you. I think if you'd like to just keep on answering live, that would be great.
Yeah, Laura, let's see. So in terms of there's a question on is the cost, and I think this is charging costs calculated at a national average, or you can get state by state information or region by region. So we have a couple selections of state level electricity prices. So in terms of the kind of underlying electricity rate and the emissions. So I think we have California, Indiana, and then the national average. And the selection of states are really meant to reflect kind of a range in grid mixes. So we have underlying rates for those, but the kind of charging cost adder that's calculated for the EVSE is just a national average. So we have kind of various state level rates, but then we apply kind of a national average charging cost adder on top of it. But really interested in hearing like use cases and value of more regionally resolved data. So yeah, happy to hear feedback or comments on that. But right now we have a subset of states, again, that really represent different grid mixes, but then we add kind of a national average charging cost adder on top of it to reflect the cost of charging infrastructure. And then I see two questions on transportation standard scenarios. One is, when will transportation standard scenarios be available? And will the standard scenarios have granular deployment results by state for both light duty and medium and heavy duty? The plan is to publish transportation standard scenarios spring of 2025, so kind of March, April timeframe. We will have scenarios of adoption for light duty and medium and heavy duty vehicles, but this year the plan is to just do it at a national level. Though we're really interested in expanding this, in future iterations to go into more detail. But currently for this first release, it's planned to be at kind of the national geographic resolution.
Super, thank you, Paige. Any other questions?
Laura, one just came in on, if industry has feedback on the assumptions, is there a way we can provide data through the website?
Sorry, I'm not seeing that.
Second to last one, yeah.
There it is. Yeah, got it. So through the website, there's a place where comments can come in, and we do check those comments. And so if you want to drop an email address in, we can take up a correspondence over email about that data. And sorry, Paige, did you answer both of the ones on standard scenarios?
Yeah, on the timeline and the essentially geographic resolution. Yep.
There's also one on light duty and medium duty.
Yeah. Oh, I thought it was just by state. So yeah, just to elaborate, we will have adoption results both for light duty vehicles, and then as well as medium and heavy duty vehicles. And medium and heavy duty vehicle resolution will be by various different classes like light, medium, and heavy, and some other characteristics. But again, in terms of so we'll have deployment results specific for those applications, but we will not have state specific deployment results this year, though that's something that we're interested in pursuing in future standard scenarios.
So there's a question, can we use the model for given monthly finance payments for PV and battery and net savings? That sounds like a distributed electricity generation question, but if this is related to transportation, please elaborate on the transportation connection. And then regarding if it is a electricity generation connection, there is an NREL model called SAM, as well as one called REOPT that might be best suited for detailed kind of cash flow monthly level finance around distributed electricity generation. There is a great question for all of us on the panel about what results we might have found surprising. And I am not thinking of any very surprising results, but I guess it takes a lot to surprise me. So I'd like to open that up to the rest of the panelists as well, if anyone has other perspectives on what's particularly surprising.
I don't know if I would say this surprising, but I think two things that are worth noting in the results are, one is the variation in charging costs. Again, that's kind of why we're reflecting it as a range. But even within, light duty vehicles, there's various charging costs for the different applications. And then as well as, it's very sensitive to assumptions on capital cost and utilization, and how those costs change for, depot charging applications versus corridor charging applications. So I think it's just really important to think through, various different use cases and how those might see and have access to different charging costs. And one thing, we've talked about too is disaggregating charging costs at a higher level of resolution. Like right now we're showing national averages, but given this variation, there could be value in kind of showing things at a more disaggregated level. So I think that's one thing, is just kind of variation in charging costs. And the other thing, not surprising, but just an important thing to note is kind of in a similar vein, when you look at levelized cost of driving, or potentially, how alternative powertrains compete with the conventional technologies on the medium and heavy duty side. There's a lot of variation in terms of like the use case. So light duty or, medium duty vehicles versus heavy duty vehicles are going to have a very different trajectory of levelized cost of driving and kind of where they achieve cost parity. And it depends on a lot of assumptions on their application and, the vehicle's miles traveled. So I think that's just another important caveat to note when you're looking at the data, is that it's important to understand the specific use case.
Yeah, and Paige, unless we get a whole bunch more questions, I think we might have time for you to display on the website some of the stuff that you answered in some of your previous answers. So if you'd like to switch over to the website and show some of the things that you ran through, I think we would have time for that. While you're doing that, there is a question that says green hydrogen-based heavy-duty vehicle data for research, but I'm not sure what the question is. So if the person who wrote that would like to elaborate on what the question is regarding the green hydrogen-based heavy-duty vehicle data for research, would be happy to address that if we can nail down that question. And then there's also a question, it says, I will look at the data included, but could you describe how to factor in future costs, like increases in materials for EV batteries as supplies become limited, or as hydrogen ICE engines increase in production volumes, the cost should decrease? So I would split that question into two categories of potential future cost increases. The one I think is more related to supply chains and especially the materials for those supply chains. And the other is more related to how we factor in learning by doing, or learning curves, sometimes also called progress ratios. So regarding the supply chain question, that would be one of the things that could cause technology cost and performance to fall more on the conservative end of the range, or more the near-term end of the range for our scenarios. And so I think in analysis, it's often common for folks to just want to use one scenario and to have that be the mid or moderate or reference case. Would definitely encourage an exploration of a range of scenarios, and the conservative side of those expected projections is definitely worth considering if you're concerned about supply chain. We don't do anything that explicitly models the supply chain constraints in detail. So that conservative case is where you'd need to go to consider costs in that direction. And then regarding learning curves, we do include learning curves. However, for technologies that are produced at volume, those would no longer be subjected to learning. Hydrogen ICE engine is not included in ATB at this time, and I'm not sure the extent to which it would be considered like mature or nascent. So a nascent technology would be subject to learning. So Paige, did you want to show us some stuff on the website?
Yeah, I can just show a few things. I can just kind of briefly go over some of the key assumptions that we're using on the charging cost side. Not into detail, but just kind of show some of the assumptions that you have here. So for example, this is on the electricity page, showing our assumptions for the split of charging for various different locations to get this kind of national average number. So we have a split of home charging, and then we have that broken down into like residential rates versus a time of use rate. And then we have a split of workplace or community level 2 charging, and then on-road DCFC charging. So these all have different assumed electricity rates. They have different infrastructure costs, so kind of a levelized cost of charging infrastructure. And then we are weighting them based on other analysis in terms of like what's the expected share of charging at those various different locations. And then to kind of get these costs in this column, we have the assumptions on capital and installation costs, on utilization, and then power level, many of which assumptions are derived from other analyses. So for example, the National Charging Network analysis that's linked here, and then as well as some others to inform these assumptions. Then we kind of have a similar set for medium and heavy duty vehicles. So for medium and heavy duty vehicles, we reflect that range in costs. So we kind of have low and high values for the different applications, and then the associated assumptions that go into those values, again, on capital and installation cost, utilization, and power mix. So just wanted to highlight, like, if you're interested in how we're deriving those, there's a lot more detail on those assumptions on the electricity page.
Super, thank you, Paige. So there was a question about carbon footprint that I answered in the chat, and I did want to refer folks with an interest in that area to the Argonne National Laboratory GREET model. And Wee-Sung, did you want to say anything else about the GREET model from Argonne National Laboratory?
Yes, I can briefly mention about the GREET model. So all the LCA, life cycle analysis research for this ATB were supported by the GREET model developed by the Argonne National Lab. So I saw some of the questions about the LCA and the system boundary and how we calculate the specific numbers in the ATB values. If you have a specific questions about the GREET model, you can send an email to us, which is GREET, GREET @anl.gov. Then we can answer your specific questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Wee-Sung. We, I think, are pretty well done with questions. So if anyone has any lingering questions, this is the last call. Again, really greatly appreciate everyone for joining today, and also appreciate the entire team here. Thank you very much for all your work. And is there anything else from anyone else on our panel that you'd like to highlight regarding this 2024 Transportation ATB update?
Sounds like nothing from the panel, Laura, but just wanted to remind everyone that we have the links to register for the newsletter, for the contact form, for the slides, and for the website in the chat. So be sure to access those before we close the webinar. And then we will be following up in the next week or so with links to the recording and the slides once they're available on the ATB site. So keep an eye out for that. And then if you think of any questions later, please feel free to reach out to the ATB team.